Contrary to popular belief, Venus flytraps do not predate insects for the sake of getting energy. As you can see, they are green and thus contain chlorophyll and are perfectly able to photosynthesize. Same with other carnivorous plants, such as this sundew plant, which captures insects with these specialized leaves with small sticky droplets on the end, and then closes around the insect in order to digest it. Nor do these pitcher plants, which have waxy coatings on the inside of the pitcher and a sweet-smelling liquid that's down in the bottom, such that an insect might come flying along and then land on the inside and then slide down to the bottom, and then inside that pit there's a bunch of digestive enzymes to digest them. All of these carnivorous plants are green and can photosynthesize, so they are not looking to insects as a source of energy, but rather as a source of nitrogen. Though we don't often realize it, all organisms are competing for sources of nitrogen. And since plants are looking to compete for this resource from limited stores in the soil, these carnivorous plants have developed an adaptation to get themselves direct sources of nitrogen from the insects that they break down. Now, how important is nitrogen? Well, it's important enough that it's one of the 6 most common elements inside our body, along with carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and then there's nitrogen next, and phosphorus and sulfur. And there are 2 macromolecules for which nitrogen is an essential ingredient. The first is proteins, and you can see some amino acids, the monomers of proteins up at the top here, and then boom, there's a little nitrogen right here and a little nitrogen right here. Those nitrogens are important for protein monomers getting attached together to form, here's a dipeptide, and then eventually, as you know, a polypeptide, which can, once folded on itself, make large complex structures that allow organisms to do all sorts of things, such as move around and speed up chemical reactions and so on. It is also an essential ingredient in our nucleic acids, specifically the nitrogenous bases within those nucleic acids, such as adenine, thymine, cytosine, and guanine, which get their name, nitrogenous base, from the plethora of nitrogens found therein. So we wouldn't be able to make that beautiful double helix without nitrogen. In other words, it's really important. Like most forms of matter on Earth, it cycles from being part of abiotic factors such as the atmosphere to being part of living things such as bacteria, plants, and animals, and then back into the abiotic environment again. However, at any given time, most of the nitrogen in the biosphere is contained in the atmosphere. This so-called atmospheric nitrogen, or N2, is the most plentiful gas in the air between you and the screen you're looking at, in total comprising about 78% of our atmosphere. As you may remember, atoms of any sort, including nitrogen, bond with each other in order to complete their outer shells to become more stable. Now, nitrogen is not stable. It's only got 5 electrons in its outer shell, as you can see right here, and its more stable cousin neon has the 8 electrons necessary. So in order for nitrogen to look more like neon, it needs to gain 3 electrons. 1 here, 1 here, and 1 here. We just learned that atmospheric nitrogen has the chemical formula of N2, and in order for those 2 nitrogen atoms to become stable, nitrogen forms a very strong triple covalent bond. By sharing 3 pairs of electrons, each of these nitrogen atoms becomes stable, resembles neon, and also this molecule is very, very hard to break apart because of the triple covalent bonding in the center of it. Only 2 things on Earth, in fact, can tear this apart. One is lightning, and the other is enzymes, the small molecular scissors that organisms use to speed up chemical reactions. What's special about these enzymes, though, is that there's only one class of organisms that makes them. A group of bacteria known as nitrogen-fixing bacteria, which take that atmospheric nitrogen and turn it into more usable forms, such as ammonia. Some of these nitrogen-fixing bacteria exist on their own in the soil to perform nitrogen fixation, and then others live associated with plants in small nodules on their roots. Most famously, this occurs in the legume family, which includes beans, peas, and clover, which you can see in your backyard, All of these plants have special structures on their roots called nodules. Here's a photograph of one long root coming this way, and here are the little nodules you can see. The back of a dime is included in this picture as reference. And inside those nodules live nitrogen-fixing bacteria which share a mutualism with their host legume plants. The bacteria receive a home and sugars from the plant running photosynthesis, while the plant obviously gets a benefit because it receives a source of usable nitrogen because of the bacteria's nitrogen fixation. Once these usable sources of nitrogen, such as ammonia, have been generated, then the plants can start taking them up through their roots by a process known as assimilation. Animals can also assimilate some of that nitrogen, such as you can see this bunny right here, by eating some of the plants. Decomposers also get their turn whenever any of these organisms die, and the nitrogen is returned to the soil either by death or by waste from animals, such as urine and feces. Particularly our urea, that's a chemical that's inside our urine, is very concentrated with this nitrogen. So there's a mini cycle within a cycle here, as the ammonia gets picked up by assimilation, incorporated into the bodies of organisms, and then put back into the soil, and round it goes. Note, as always, the key role of decomposers in this, returning the nitrogen that was inside those dead bodies and that waste to the soil. The cycle is completed by a group of bacteria known as denitrifying bacteria, which, just that, denitrify these compounds containing nitrogen in the soil and return atmospheric nitrogen back to the atmosphere in the form of N2. Of all the arrows in a nitrogen cycle diagram, the one that is the most limiting for life on Earth is this one, the rate at which nitrogen can be fixed. And so with that soil bacteria and the bacteria that's associated with roots, they can only take up nitrogen out of the atmosphere and put it into a usable form so fast. And what's more, lightning storms aren't happening all the time, and that's the only other source of natural ammonia for the plants and animals to use. So humans have jump-started the process by learning how to synthesize their own fertilizer, which is basically concentrated nitrogen sources that are usable for plants, which they will then spread on their fields in order to help their crops grow more efficiently. While this fertilizer can greatly increase crop yield on a particular farm on the short term, it still has some important and sometimes damaging environmental implications. Whenever you mess with a matter cycle at one stage, you have the potential to mess with it at many other stages. And not even just with that cycle. For example, the introduction of fertilizer, which tampers with one part of the nitrogen cycle, couples with the water cycle to cause some damaging effects. For example, if there's a bunch of fertilizer that's sitting over here in a farm, and then that fertilizer is carried off into the waterways by runoff, what occurs is this: lakes that are devoid of any sort of life except for algae. How did this occur? When the nitrogen arrives in a body of water such as a lake, the algae that are inside basically have a party. Their population had been hovering around a carrying capacity that was being limited by a naturally occurring amount of nitrogen. But then suddenly, the amount of nitrogen spiked. And with that, the algal population booms. And following that, any number of things can happen. The algae population grows exponentially until other limiting factors stop growth. Perhaps sunlight, oxygen, or carbon dioxide become limiting. And as the algal population starts to decline, decomposers start to come in and break down that dead algae. These uncontrolled fluctuations in the algal population and the decomposer population have terrible effects for the other living things in the pond. For example, if suddenly the number of decomposers skyrockets, these decomposers are heterotrophs, they run cellular respiration, and they use up all the oxygen in the water, leading to the death of all the other heterotrophs in the pond. This process is called eutrophication and can be very damaging. And for this reason, it's very important for us as humans to understand the nitrogen cycle and to learn about how we might affect it in positive and indeed negative ways such as this one.